This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us on this Friday's programming, we start as we always do with our grain market update from K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. He provides insight as to why recent crop tours may be causing volatility in the grain futures markets. Also ahead, insight into the most recently released editions of the Fertilizer, Forage, and Experiment Station reports is provided by K-State Nutrient Management Specialist Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. We end this week's programming with an optimistic agricultural weather report from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. He describes the potential for some timely precipitation during the first couple of weeks of September, which is definitely welcome in terms of upcoming planting seasons for both wheat and canola. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly grain market report. And to cover that, as always, we have with us Dan O'Brien, a K-State grain market economist. So, Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Samantha.
Absolutely. So today I know that we're going to hit hard on the futures markets because there's some trends that are really developing here that we need to talk about.
Well, that's right. The losses that we'd had on the corn market from the rally that basically took us into the starting about, well, in early March, tied in with Ukraine war concerns. We rallied from about 580 up to as high as 780. And then, as grew to be a little less concern about that crop challenge, we saw prices fall off really beginning mid to late June. Fell off all the way down to 560, and now with concerns about this year's crop drought in the West, pretty well acknowledged, but some problems really, I think, originating from the high heat that we had in a good part of July. We've got a Midwest crop tour all over the rest of the Corn Belt, Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, Illinois, Indiana, and on, that generally are showing yields at or below what the USDA had projected in that August 1st number. That national yield is 375.4. Now, there was a DTN digital crop tour several weeks ago that came through. They were asking farmers what they thought their yields were going to be, and that number came in really, well, about 10 bushels lower than the 8 bushels lower than the USDA number, about 167. So now we're balancing the issue of how extreme the damage will finally be tallied as once we move into the September and succeeding crop reports. As we speak at the end of this week, that number, probably even if it comes out at 174, 175, 176, there's still a lot of uncertainty. But who'd really be surprised if those numbers came out at 173, 174, et cetera? If it gets down much farther below that, then you've got real issues in terms of the U.S. corn supply-demand balance sheet. And my thoughts are that, again, we came up with USDA's projection of 14.359 billion bushels in that August report, ending stocks of 1.388 billion bushels. If we're down 200 million, and that's conservative, could be down a lot more, 200 million on that production number, down to, say, 14.1 or 14.2, somewhere in there. You take those same numbers off the ending stocks, and then you're looking at ending stocks closer to 1.1, 1.2 billion, and dropping just that much farther below 10%. And where prices go from there, what the USDA had projected for this marketing year 665, with that much tightening of stocks, you'd expect, we'll be polite and say, a significant upward adjustment in prices. I think that the USDA, in their September report, they'll go out, they'll measure in the field estimates of yield on different plots they have around the countryside, and they'll also get farmers' opinions from a survey on that. But I would not be surprised that there's some circumspectness in terms of how they adjust to where they're finally going to go. If their initial surveys came in and said 170 bushels an acre, I don't know that they would go there right away. I think, given the uncertainty, they would move in that direction. That's their pattern. They would eventually end up at 170, but I think they're loath to just upset the markets completely until they have full evidence. I would also say on that same tour report that we're looking at soybeans, and there's some of these areas there's damage to soybeans too, but generally, we have more moisture now, and as we come through parts of August, or a little bit cooler weather, and I don't know that Midwest Crop Tour will come in and say much different than the USDA's numbers of, well, their last figure on August of 51.9. It could be 51, thereabouts, et cetera, but you're still in a situation where if you lose many bushels off the soybean number, really you just start rationing usage is what you would do all that much more. Last projection is $14.35, tremendous price for soybeans. But if we see a shaved off number and in terms of production, instead of 14.531 billion, it's 14.3, 14.4, then all that much more you'd see a rationing of crush and exports. And I doubt we take it all off the bottom line of ending stocks because it's already down to 245. If you get 200 million off of there, you're down to almost nothing. We're going to start rationing almost immediately with that. So I think overall, if you stand back and look at this philosophically, we're not surprised, being in the Western Corn Belt as we are, Samantha, that, things look really rough in these Western states. And we're trying to gauge now just probably how much the heat of July cut back that corn crop. And I think that if we were to have a major surprise to market, got down to 14 billion bushels and below, I think you'd have all that much more of an inverted market, strong upfront futures prices, all that much stronger basis. We've seen basis weaken a little bit in Western Kansas, still tremendous positive. Sure. But you would turn the tables, no doubt, to an inverted market, very front-loaded, people scrambling in somewhat of a, I wouldn't say desperate or panic, but it'd be that way. In a really enthusiastic manner, they'd be pursuing whatever supplies they get hold of, and there wouldn't be any reward for storage in the market. They'd want whatever they could get now. At the same time, those producers that were blessed with bushels, they'll have the question of whether they would take tremendous prices right now or do they think there's something else better out there. Probably couldn't lose either way in this tight situation, but it does seem that the people that will be in the catbird seat this year will be those producers that were blessed enough, fortunate enough to have good yields and a commodity in hand for corn and soybeans, really, that a lot of people desire. But it would be a seller's market. They'd certainly be in position to benefit from all this.
Absolutely. I mean, we mentioned this a month ago at this point now that we knew these August reports from the USDA would be optimistic, I guess, is kind of the word that we'd use, not wanting to change the markets too much by being overly enthusiastic or especially pessimistic about it, I guess. But as you mentioned, those tours are kind of providing more of that information with the DTN, with farmers being probably a little bit still optimistic in their reports and hopeful in that matter, but these actual on-the-ground crop tour is probably providing a bit more security and really understanding what our numbers are. So
the report dates going forward are September the 12th, October the 12th, I think November the 9th, all key days in the market going forward. I could also add in, we have some export information this past week we could look at. And, we just had, I think as we come to the end of, we're coming to the end of the corn marketing year. It ends August the 31st, so just around the corner. And whatever shortfalls we have in terms of export numbers meeting feed grains and for soybeans, if we fall short, then the USDA changes their balance sheet for the old crop marketing year on September 1, then they go to the new with a little more carryover. So anyway, you do see that situation probably going to happen for corn. It looks like we're going to run short by, at least 50 to 100 million bushels. So that'll come in and you'll up the ending stocks for the old crop. Same for the new. It looks like we're going to have that situation also for grain sorghum. For soybeans, if anything, we're in a situation where we may still, with a last-minute surge over the last 2-3 weeks, end up and meet that goal. But for wheat, we still continue to struggle. And the USDA very likely, even though the marketing year end is still way out into next year on May the 31st, we are running behind pace with what the USDA projected, and I guess we'll see where it all goes.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned earlier the impacts that we're really starting to see just from the heat we've been experiencing this summer. And that's across all boards, right?
It's really affected corn during July, during that key reproductive time for tasseling and for pollination. But now during the month of August, we've had some dry conditions earlier, but we've cooled off some, caught some rain in parts of July, in the eastern and central corn belt, and that's probably upheld prospects for the crop. So we'll see where that finally takes us. I do think that any prospects that we'd have for rainfall would help us on wheat seeding. That's just around the corner. The next 6 to 10 day outlook, precipitation chances are leaning slightly above average in parts of western Kansas. And, it's been a while since we could actually say that about Kansas. If we do get moisture, that'll help on wheat seeding. And I think certainly give us hope that crop could get established and be successful heading off into the fall.
Absolutely. I think listeners will be interested to hear that our weather report coming later in today's programming will hopefully provide some, positive outlooks for producers to look forward to so that, those mentioned planting seasons that we have coming up are a little bit more favorable conditions that they will be dealing with there. So hopeful for that on all accounts here.
I guess we're looking forward to where the rest of the marketing year goes. And I think that when we get to September 12th, either way, we'll have volatility, very likely, unless we miraculously just have pre-report expectations that exactly hit on what the yield numbers are, which that'd be unexpected. If it does happen, then maybe we go sideways. But I think we're such a tight world supply-demand situation for these crops that either way, we tend to lean relative to pre-report expectations. We'll probably get a response in the market and just more volatility.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, in times like these with such volatility and no understanding of where really we're hoping or we expect these markets to go, we really do appreciate your insight that you can provide. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Samantha.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Dan O'Brien. He is a grain market economist here at K-State, providing the latest for our grain market report. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for a research report update. These are yearly updated reports that are put out by the university, and today we're going to cover 3 of those, so the Forage, Fertilizer, and then the Field Research reports. And to cover that today, we have with us Dr. Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. He is a nutrient management specialist here at K-State. So Dorivar, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So like I said, we're going to talk about 3 different reports here today. But let's start first and foremost with the fertilizer report, which I know is near and dear to your heart specifically. What really is included in this report?
Yes, this is overall, just to give an overview of these reports, these are basically intended to provide essentially an update, progress report of research that is ongoing in our department, primarily the Department of Agronomy, but we also have other departments that perhaps are contributing with articles to these reports. So it is something that is intended basically for farmers and agronomists out there. The type of information tends to be very applied, so it's really intended for that audience, and it's a way for, again, farmers to see what we're doing and hopefully find some information that will be useful. And like I say, there are basically progress reports, so most of the time will be preliminary information, but it's one way to get that information immediately, what we saw this year or last year, get it out there and be available for farmers to start thinking about it and see if they find any useful information for their operation. So that's really the main objective of these different reports. And like you mentioned, obviously, I work a lot more with the fertilizer reports, which really intend to focus specifically more on soil fertility and fertilizer nutrient management topics. So just to give you an overview, the type of things that you may see in the fertilizer reports will include things like soil test calibration for different crops, for phosphorus, potassium. For example, this year in the current version of the 2022 report, I know we have some pretty good information there on nitrogen fertilizer, nitrogen use efficiency with different application methods, which has been very popular with the high fertilizer prices, of course, and trying to find ways to improve efficiency. We have that for corn. We have some work on winter wheat, looking at phosphorus and nitrogen. The same thing also for soybean. We have some work on potassium that just came out in the current report. So that gives you an example of the type of things that you will find there. And again, it's up-to-date research that's just coming out and give an overview. The other reports, the field reports, my colleague Eric A.D. oversee that report. And in this one, we really try to put a little bit more of the crop production and cropping systems type topics. So you will find things on planting dates, population for different regions in the state. And so again, that's overall kind of a big picture of the type of things that you can find. And on the forage side, it's similar also. We focus obviously a little bit more on the forage. My colleague John Holman oversee that one at Garden City, but really information from different parts of the state, focusing specifically on forages. So in general, a lot of good information, Samantha, on ongoing research in the department on different topics. And like I say, the main thing I want to emphasize here is that this is intended really more for farmers. We try to, not your typical scientific report, but it's really more intended for intended for farmers and agronomists.
Absolutely, which of course is a huge goal of Extension, is to make sure that audience's needs are being met. And one of the ways that you guys do that is through these reports, because they're so detailed, especially regionally, right?
Yes, and that's one of the things that also I guess we have to emphasize here. We mentioned the 3 reports, but there are also more regional reports, I think, that focus on, for example, only Southeast Kansas and only Western Kansas. And those are also housed right now in our agronomy website. You can actually find pretty easily now. We have a new website, actually, Department of Agronomy, and you can find those in the agronomy.ksu.edu. And if you just look for research reports, you'll see the link there, and you'll find all of these different reports available there for the public. One thing also I enjoy about these reports is that it has some historical value, essentially, because this has been going on for many years. In my case, when I first got to K-State, I was actually fortunate to be able to have access to the fertilizer reports, and I was able to see work on fertilizer research in Kansas going all the way to the 60s, and just very impressive amount of work that has been done. And so that's also another component. One thing that we can easily do is just go back and look for things that has been done in the past that sometimes always can be relevant today, perhaps to some issues that we are seeing out there, some new problems that we're seeing. We may have some past research that can help us answer some of that.
Absolutely. So things like drought concerns, maybe some of those for those years that we experienced that, I'd be like, what worked then? Let's see if it works now. Yes,
funny you mentioned that, but actually that's been one example. We did, for example, quite a bit of research back in 2012 with the drought we have on nutrient uptake and drought-affected corn and crops in general, and those are included in the reports. I wish I didn't have to look at those again. However, this year that kind of information is useful as we are having some drought-affected crops, and again, how we can use that information that we collected back in 2012 to answer questions in terms of nutrient uptake, nitrates in the biomass, and so on. So that's an excellent example of one topic that we can go back and look at past research, and definitely something that we can apply today.
Yes, it's definitely a cool way of framing the way that this research can be used. It's not just, for this year alone. It could be used in the future as well, which is very, very cool. So when it comes to producers, when they're going through some of these reports, how can they really use it? Should they be starting with their specific region in mind, or should they start with some of their specific crops that they're interested in? What do you kind of suggest?
Yes, and again, the way these reports are basically organized, they tend to focus primarily, again, on crop production, fertilizer, and forages, but we also do have regional focus on the type of research that's happening. So I think there are really different ways to do this. We also have the capability to search on specific topics. So if we are looking at specifically nitrogen topics, we can search for that, and some of the articles and work on that specific topic is going to come up. And so there really depends a little bit on what the objective is. I think oftentimes it's also just good to see what happened in terms of research, for example, this year, and what's new, and what may be of interest and applicable to your specific operation. And so I think there's really a couple ways to do that. One of the things that I'm excited about is that with the new website, it's becoming pretty easy now to find this information. I think in the past it's been a little bit more difficult to find it. And so now, since it's right there in the agronomic website, we can have access pretty easily.
Yes, I definitely agree. I have to applaud whoever designed your guys' new website because it is very user-friendly and very easy to search through. So for those of you looking for the link to that website that was previously mentioned, it of course will be in the show notes of today's program as always, which can be found on agtoday.net. So if you're wanting to check out these 3 reports or even beyond, I know there's ways to search for different reports in the little search toolbox as well on that website. You can do that and you can find those links on agtoday.net. But Dorivar, you mentioned some of the changes that happened. So in terms of what people tuning in can expect to see change-wise in this year's report, the 2022 reports, what can they specifically look out for?
Yes, in terms of changes there, one of the things that I will say is that, over the years, we've been moving more, obviously, to more digital web-based version. And so that perhaps has been one of the main things. In the past, we used to have essentially booklets that are printed and available, or PDFs that can be printed and ordered, and those are no longer available. So pretty much essentially it's all based on the website, it's digital, which to me is a big advantage because it's essentially available to anyone that has access to the websites. And so that's perhaps is one of the main changes. But overall, I would say that the type of content and the goal of this report has been essentially the same, and that is basically to focus on the apply side of things and how this can be useful for production here in Kansas, because obviously it's focused on research done here at K-State and across Kansas.
Absolutely. Well, Dorivar, thank you so much for your time and for sharing updates on these reports. I'm sure producers will be looking out for them.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Dr. Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. He's a nutrient management specialist here at K-State, sharing information on the 2022 Forage, Fertilizer, and Field Research reports, which can be found on the agronomy website. After this short break, we will round out this Friday's program, as we always do, with our weekly agricultural weather report from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. But also a quick preview at the week ahead and what listeners tuning in can expect from us here at Agriculture Today. Next week, we will continue on with some of our departmental highlights of departments here at K-State within the College of Agriculture and the unique opportunities that they each hold for their students. Those departments include both the Department of Ag Communications and the Department of Ag Education. We will also have a preview of the upcoming state fair provided by Kansas State Fair General Manager Brian Scholes. Ginny Ift will also be joining us next week to cover some of the pertinent topics that she addressed at last week's Risk and Profit Conference. So next week will definitely be a week of programming that you won't want to miss out on. But in the meantime, again, after this short break, we will be back with more here on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly agricultural weather report from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. So thanks for joining us, Chip.
Yipper, I'm bringing some good news, hopefully.
Woohoo, that's always good to hear. So that good news being the moisture we've experienced kind of in the last week?
Yeah, well, we have had areas of isolated heavy rains that's occurred in central and even the far southwest. And that's more moisture than a lot of folks have seen in quite some time. Unfortunately, though, those were localized, and they weren't widespread by any means, but some big impacts. We saw some soil moisture improvements, and then hopefully lead the way for some folks to get some better planting in. But even where the precipitation did occur is limited. We just need a good long-duration rain.
Absolutely. So the areas that got that rain, was it where they needed it most, really, like in the southwest and central areas?
Yeah, the far southwest is probably the biggest benefactor. And this is actually the third rain event they've had over the last month and a half. So it was just enough to improve drought conditions slightly there by about one category, only along the Colorado border for the most part. Then the other area of pretty good benefit, we didn't have drought improvement there in the southeast, but we did have rain there in Cherokee County, and that area was really hit hard. They went 70 days without a half inch of rain. Seems like a lot in one day, a half inch, but for them, they should get it a lot more frequently. And it was 70 days, so June 7th was the last time they had up to a half inch of rain. Like I said, unfortunately, it was too late for the crops. I know that there was soybean failure out there. And then the corn, they're already harvesting in that neck of the woods, and they're already way below their average amount.
You mentioned soil moisture improving there, which is something that we've been really hoping for. I just spoke with Mike Stom. He's a canola breeder, and he was explaining the importance and significance of that for canola. So maybe some optimism there.
Yeah, like I said, those areas were pretty limited. While some folks did see some precip outside of those improved areas, it wasn't enough to meet the weekly demands. We average anywhere from about 0.6 of an inch to an inch, depending on where you're at in the state, and we're decreasing that each week. We need that much to kind of offset the demand for vegetation. So in fields that do not have any vegetation on them, big improvements. Whereas where we did see the improvements, and they still have actively growing vegetation, such as pastures, very short-term improvements. But, yeah, they really need that for both canola and wheat as they start looking at planting here in the next month.
With that next month being September, is there any optimism in the first several weeks? I think you mentioned before when we were talking potential for a typhoon to have impacts in our state.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. The first thing is we've had high pressure kind of develop part of the Rockies. That's kept us under a northerly flow. That's also pushed the last cold front we had down south and shunted a lot of the moisture down south where Dallas and Texas and Louisiana all had really heavy rain. That front is expected to gradually shift back northward with moisture. Now, it's not going to be active until another cold front comes in this weekend. And that cold front can clash with that moist, warm air mass and hopefully develop some showers and thunderstorms, especially for central and eastern Kansas. The thunderstorm activity is going to be really isolated, but there's a chance of moisture. And it looks like that front's going to be very slow to progress, almost stall out over parts of Kansas. We won't see the big rain amounts we saw further south, but hopefully we can get a couple of days in with opportunities of showers and thunderstorms, and then increased cloud cover and increased humidity as a result. As we get further into September, that pattern looks like it's going to try to break down again and go back to hot and dry. But we have a typhoon in the western Pacific right now. A lot of times those have the potential to really alter the jet stream and the weather pattern across the U.S. several days to weeks downstream. Typhoon is not quite strong enough, but it's going to be enough to re-amplify the pattern we're going to have next week and potentially keep it persistent. So that might mean that we drag those moisture chances further into early September and hopefully prolonging chances of moisture. Don't see any big rains, like I said, just keeping the chance of showers and thunderstorms around enough to bump down those temperatures, increase humidity, and hopefully increase some chances of precipitation. The outlook for September, though, was for above normal temperatures, below normal precipitation favored. So hopefully we don't verify that and we can make up some of the deficits we have in the beginning of September.
Absolutely. Here's hoping for sure. But as always, Chip, thank you so much for your time.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Chip Redmond, our K-State meteorologist, for this week's Agricultural Weather Report. That concludes today's programming. We'll be back with more next week on Agriculture Today.